On today's episode of Future Says, we have Maitê Bezerra, Principal Analyst of Software-Defined Vehicles at Informa Tech. Maitê, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So tell us a little bit more about yourself and Informa Tech.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, I'm a principal analyst focusing software-defined vehicles. So my job is understanding this paradigm shift that the automotive industry is facing, which is the digitalization of pretty much everything. I'm not going to say much because we're going to explore this later on. But this is pretty much what I'm looking at, how this transition is affecting OEMs, suppliers, and the whole ecosystem, and what are the new suppliers actually entering this new ecosystem. And at Wards, we have a research pretty much focused on automotive, so it's a really good place to be. And this year we are completing 100 years focusing on automotive.
Exciting. Very good. So let's start with the definition. Software-defined vehicle.
Well, you're starting with the most difficult question.
That's the way to do it. It's all easy from here.
Okay, so I'm saying it's difficult because the industry hasn't reached a consensus on what software-defined vehicle actually means. And in my opinion, this is because again, as I mentioned before, we're talking about a paradigm shift. So many things are changing. So it's really hard to, put in a single sentence something that will encompass all the changes that we're going to see in the future. But if we are to, look, okay, what is a software-defined vehicle? In my opinion, is a car that has a digitalized system that provides the OEM the flexibility of making changes to the software and to the nature of the hardware of the car during the life cycle of this vehicle. So we're talking about 10, 15, 20 years, right? But the changes that the OEM it's making, it's based on vehicle data and user data that has been collected during this time as well. So it's the OEM being able to, for example, making a change in the vehicle that was when you bought L2 in terms of automation and transform this into L2 Plus or L3, or perhaps, changing one hardware that was before just used for ADAS functionality, such as driving monitoring systems. So you have the camera that's looking at the driver and see if it's paying attention when the assisted driving system is engaged. And suddenly you use the camera also for an infotainment functionality, such as Zoom calls, right? So you do this all in demand. So it's the OEM having this flexibility, right? When things get complex is having the flexibility of doing this in the vehicle doesn't depend just in having the technology in the vehicle. There is a lot that has to change in the OEM as well, and the way that OEM build its relationships with its supply system as well. So it's very broad, and I think it's one of the reasons why we hear that some different companies sometimes have a different view of what software-defined vehicle is, but that's because they are affected in a different way through this digitalization. But overall, we're talking about the full digitalization of the vehicle lifecycle.
Okay. On a recent episode of this show, we had Sandeep Gupta, who is the manager of connected cars at Subaru in Canada. And he spoke a lot about a connected car. Is a connected car a software-defined vehicle? Is a software-defined vehicle a connected car?
That is such a good question. A software-defined vehicle has to be a connected car, right? Connectivity is at the center, is a key enabler of software-defined vehicles, because you won't be able to make any changes on demand if you don't have connectivity, right? But it's way more than just a connected car. So I think the way that we were approaching connected cars before were, a vehicle that had cloud-based services. So you would have real-time navigation in your car, right? But software-defined vehicles is way more than that. It's actually being able to use the cloud, not just to provide functionalities in the car, but actually help you develop softwares in the car and actually make the software development process much easier, and also help the OEM to create this life cycle journey. So you have the customer journey during the whole life cycle of the car, communicating, creating touch points with your customer as well.
Mm-hmm. And you're based in London?
Yes.
So primarily looking at Europe for cars, or very much global?
Very much global.
Okay. So tell us about, what does Europe do well? What does America do well? What does Asia do well?
Ooh, all right. That's such a good question. um, Asia. I think I'll start with Asia. Asia is a region where we are seeing the fastest development of technology in cars. And I think one of the reasons that is driving this first, we have a lot of BEV startups in there, and they do have an advantage of not having legacy. So if you think about the traditional OEMs, they had the traditional way of building vehicles, of selling vehicles, and monetizing vehicles, right? Now, when we think about software-defined vehicles, I mentioned we're talking about digitalization, right? So everything's changing. The hardware is changing, the software is changing, connectivity is changing, and the way that you sell vehicles and you make money with them is changing as well. And it's not just a incremental change, it's a fundamental change. So these companies that are starting from scratch, that don't have any legacy, they can take this approach and see and say, okay, we're going to design our vehicle based on our ultimate goal. And this is what they're doing. They have a software first mindset. They are software companies. They are agile. And one thing that sets them apart, they are not afraid of taking risks. So if they commit mistakes, they change it. They rebrand. They create another brand. They are really okay. We're gonna launch the vehicle. We're gonna learn about the market, and then we're gonna make adaptations. And they're very customer centric as well. So I think this is one of the reasons. If you look at China in itself and the Chinese market, the Western OEMs, they always had this brand associated to them, and customers really wanted to buy these cars because of the brand and the name. But the Chinese OEMs, especially these BEV startups, they started looking at the customer and what the customer wants. Oh, the customer wants an application in the car, WeChat, or whatever they like. Let's put it in the car. I'm not afraid of partnering with big tech. Let's take the risk. Let's
Yeah.
offer what the customer wants. And I think this really puts them ahead of the game in terms of understanding the market and adapting. So they are ahead in terms of the user experience and listening how the market is changing. And if we look at other regions now,
If we stay on Asia for 1 second, just off the back of that, based in London, are you seeing Asian cars in London? Are you seeing Asian cars in Europe in general? Or is it still more of a European ecosystem?
it's a very good question. And well, if you see a Volvo car, what would you think it is?
Yeah, I'll give you the answer you want me to give you. Swedish.
Well, and I think that's the main point,
Yeah,
right? We have Volvo, we have Polestar, and all these brands are now Chinese,
yeah.
right? They're part of the Geely Group.
We have Lotus, such a British brand, now part of the GD Group.
Exactly. So, I mean, we can say that the market is still pretty much European, but not necessarily. And what I hear is that BYD is, becoming really well accepted in Germany,
Okay.
and they're innovating quite a lot. So I think we're going to start seeing more brands. If the brand association is going to change, if we are going to now look at these traditional companies and say, oh, they are Chinese, I'm not entirely sure, but that we are going to see more Chinese vehicles around and more Asian vehicles in general, that is for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a friend went to the Shanghai Auto Show in 2023, and he said walking around, maybe this was an exaggeration, but it was close to this number, 400 different Chinese OEMs. So there's so many companies making cars in China and Asia at the moment. And that's obviously not sustainable. I don't think we're going to have that many options. They'll amalgamate together. But still, I think for me, again, being based in London like you, the automotive sector, in terms of the players, the cars out there, there's going to be so many new brands and logos that most of us have never heard of. So it's very exciting.
And I think building on that, if you think about IAA, very traditional automotive show in Germany, right? What were the main headlines that we would see? Chinese brands launching their new vehicles. So they are coming. And as you say, not sustainable, they have that a large number of OEMs. But again, this is back to their strategy. You're going to try, Not all of them will survive, but because they are trying, they are learning, they are perfecting what they're doing, and some of them will prevail.
Yeah. And they learned a lot from the joint ventures. I think all these European automakers, they couldn't just set up in China, right? They had to do a JV with the Chinese company, which is where then they learned all the skill sets, which they're now bringing to the BEVs and can be a leader within that space. So it's strategically and tactically well done.
Exactly. And I think people really underestimated the capabilities that they were building. We had Autotech Europe in November last year, and we're talking with a lot of European OEMs, and I think this mindset that Chinese cars are not at the same level of quality that we have, so we don't necessarily have to worry about them. I think they got, really in their comfort zone for a bit too much, for a bit too long, because all the feedback we hear is that the quality is much better now. And what they are offering is actually what customers want. And of course, the price. I think we can't forget the price point.
Yep.
They're offering a similar level of technology, or sometimes even better, at a much lower price. So,
Game changer.
exactly.
So how does the US compete?
Oof, it's difficult. However, I think there's one thing that we need to remember is it's like sorry, it's like electrification, right? We are in the moment of still early adopters of these cars, software-defined cars. A software-defined car doesn't have to be electric. I think this is one sometimes is a misconception, right? So this kind of technology is completely independent of powertrain. This is it's good to point out. However, as I mentioned, electrification gives you their clean slate, so it's easier for you to upgrade to software-defined architectures if you start from these architectures. But as electrification, software-defined vehicles is still in the early adopters phase. And at least in my view, what the traditional OEMs have to do is try to understand what is the value of this new tech to the mainstream market. So how will people that, I don't know, like ourselves, for example, that have, just buy a car that wants to go to point A to B, how will these people benefit from this kind of technology? How are we going to bring value to them? How are we going to bring value to the mainstream? And for me, the OEM that is able to, cross the chasm is the OEM that will become the leaders. I think today the market is still in the early adopters phase. It's still trying to understand, what the customer want, how to perfect it. So it's still very tech savvy. I don't think the general customer understand what a software-defined vehicle is. And quite frankly, I don't think we will have to. It's very technical. It's extremely technical. I mean, there's some points in there. When you buy a car, do you really think, oh, what is the hypervisor the cluster system is running on? I mean,
Yeah.
not really, right?
Yeah.
So I think that, American OEMs and European OEMs, they really have to look on how do we bring this to the mainstream? How can we actually monetize this and, make this a big technological shift?
Yeah. And I think, like you said there, a lot of customers don't understand or don't need to understand what is an STV. What do you think? So we're in the year 2024, let's say in the year 2030, so let's say roughly 5 years. What's going to be table stakes for a car company? What will customers not even be surprised to have in their car that they have in their car today? That they don't have in their car today?
I think that's the $1 million question. One thing you can say for sure is I think about where we are today in the automotive industry is where we were, if you look at the phone industry, when you had the shift from feature phones to smartphones. I think this is where we are now. So, in a high level overview, I think that in 2030, if you're a customer and you're buying a car, you will expect your vehicle to be updatable and upgradable. So it's like a phone. You will expect your car to receive improvements and software, safety patches, but also new features over time, right? And you will expect not to have to go to the dealer as well
Yep.
to get these updates. So I think this is the full idea of a digital car, right? You're going to have features running in there and they're going to improve over time. You may pay for them or not. I think the business cases and the killer applications is still something that we're trying to figure out. And I think it will actually differ because the thing about the software-defined vehicles and, digital cars, if you think about phones, even if both of us have iPhones, my phone will look very different from yours
Mine
because,
had scratches.
well, then they look very similar. But in terms of applications, for example, I will download what I want and I will personalize my phone the way I want, right? I'm going to have my own wallpaper and I don't know, the set of rules when my phone goes to sleep and etc. And I think that's what what's going to happen with the car. Your car will be customized based on your preferences. So what you want. At the end is the same car, but you have the ability of, personalize the in-cabin experience, how you want your navigation to work, what you want to see on your heads-up displays, and etc. So I think this is what we would want to expect from a car. I don't think customers will buy a car that is not updatable, that it stays the same way when you bought it.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting.
Yes, it is.
Tell us about some. So I think all automakers would agree SDV, that's the future, connectivity, etc., etc. So what are they working on right now to try to achieve that future? What are some of the challenges they're constantly trying to unlock at the moment?
Oh God, there are quite a few challenges. Again, it's the third time I'm saying this, but it's because it is a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
And I was having a discussion yesterday with several companies, but the suppliers or AWS, for example. So if you look at the car today, we have so much complexity in the vehicle architecture. So you have a lot of hardware in the car. So you have like the several different ECUs. So the traditional vehicle architecture, every function of the vehicle will have an ECU. So you have 150 ECUs in the car, right? So now we are transitioning to consolidating the hardware. That meaning that those physical ECUs, they're now becoming virtual ECUs. The problem in there is you're getting all of that complexity you have in hardware and you're shifting to software. If you just mirror what you had before, you will end up with something that is equally complex. All right. So we are seeing some suppliers actually trying to help OEMs to reduce the complexity in the software. But then you have a third step. I think I mentioned how connectivity is important. So you really need the cloud now because when we move towards this digitalization, what happens is you can't have an OEM that doesn't know who is supplying the software for the ECUs. You can't just go to a tier one supplier and say, give me a system and you design it vertically. The OEM needs to talk to the suppliers that are in the car because you need to update the software, but also because with cybersecurity regulations, the OEM will become liable if you have any faulty software in your car. And if you don't have the flexibility of making the changes, then you're going to have problems. So, you need to, create this communication channel with your suppliers. You also need to mirror whatever you have in the car in the cloud to make your development process quicker. But then, okay, we have the complexity in hardware, and then you have the problem of trying to mirror that in the software, and then you have now the problem of trying to mirror that complexity in the cloud as well. And you can't do that. You can't continue mirroring this complexity in other places because then you will still end up with something that is very difficult to manage. So I think the main challenge today now is to simplify things. You need to create abstraction layers and you need to find ways of reducing complexity as much as possible because the reality now is that the OEMs have so many challenges and so many things to manage in so many areas, right? So I think this is the the point in which the OEMs are trying to figure out how to solve these complexities and how to manage them. And at least for me, is a moment where they have to learn that collaboration and standardization have to happen. You can't have each OEM trying to do their own thing, trying to
Yeah.
develop their own operating system and etc. That's not going to work.
I was actually going to ask, are OEMs taking the same approach in general, or are you seeing radically different approaches to moving towards an SDV?
What I hear and what we see is that each OEM has slightly different approaches. And I think some of them are still trying to vertically integrate too much, trying to take too much responsibility because they want to protect their IP, of course. They want to protect their the value that they're giving to the final customer. I think they're still trying to customize too much in areas in which there is no differentiation. Like, for example, I was telling you, when you're buying a car, do you really care the operating system that, parts of your vehicle is running or the middleware layer that is being used? Not necessarily. And I think we still see OEMs trying to customize these layers too much or trying to bring it in-house. But that doesn't really deliver value to the final customer. And I think this is why you see that there is no homogeneous strategy. Each OEM is kind of trying to do its own thing still.
Could you talk, you don't need to say names if you don't want to, but about some mistakes that you've seen some of these automakers make in recent years as they're trying to move towards this SDV? You mentioned that sort of building your own operating system, building your own infotainment system. All of a sudden, these car companies who don't have the skill sets try to go out and develop software, and of course, a lot of mistakes, a lot of failures along the way. Can you talk about some of them?
Well, name names, okay.
You don't need to name names. You don't need to name names. I can think of one German automaker that
Oh, yes, of course.
yeah.
Well, I think that's a good example, right? Of too much vertical integration, of thinking, okay, I want to have ownership of how much? 60% of the software running in my car?
Mm.
Well, if you're not a software company, that is a big challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
I was having a discussion about this yesterday with some suppliers. You see, these OEMs, they're trying to build, now they stopped, but they wanted to build their own infotainment system, right? Operating system. Do you really need to do that? I mean, if you do that, look at the software world, and I think this is again what the OEMs have to look at all the industries that already have been to the software-defined transformation, right? You need to have a general platform because you need developers that will develop and innovate for your platform. If you have something that a developer needs to learn, how to build a software for your specific platform, for a specific vehicle line that would only have, I don't know, 5,000, 10,000 cars on the road, will a developer really put the effort in there? No. So, you won't be able to innovate. You won't have any applications deliver any value. So we saw this particular OEM struggling a lot in this, and this particular OEM now is starting to create partnerships with some big tech companies that they know they can help them. But I think there are some areas. So there is another. Well, it's one of the OEMs that we mentioned here, which is European/Asian. And I think it's quite interesting what was happening. So in terms of autonomous driving systems, right? Some OEM said, I want to run away from turnkey solutions that are black box and I don't know what is happening inside. And I want to build my own autonomous driving software stack. It's a very challenging task, right?
Yeah.
If you don't have the skill set for it. And we are seeing this particular OEM that migrated to suppliers that offered this open approach, and you can develop your software and use my chip. We are seeing these OEMs now kind of going back to a more turnkey supplier in the next generation of their cars. Not fully turnkey. I don't think we will see the automotive industry going back to this black box approach. No, I don't think that's the case. But you still need, suppliers that are able to offer you the pieces of the software that you're not an expert. There are only a few areas that you will innovate, right? You don't have to develop all of it.
Yeah, and I think you made a great point about Asia as well, and how there's a lot of software companies building cars now, and that's where they have a lot of that excellence in the software, and they've built a lot of the mechanical excellence via those JVs. You spoke about collaboration and how you are passionate about that being the future. In Europe, we saw Katana X recently, which was this collaboration between some of the German OEMs and suppliers around the supply chain. Do you see a world where German automakers are collaborating together with English, with Americans? How's that going to work?
That would be a dream world.
Okay.
And I think when I say collaboration, I think it's important. There are some distinctions, right? And I think we need to keep in mind there are things in the car that do not provide any differentiation, right? So this is the parts that can be fully standardized. So we see collaboration groups focusing on the middle layers, or the middleware that will go in your car. So I mentioned the hypervisor, but anything that it's in between the hardware and the layer that actually communicates to the customer, so the application layer. In that part, you can collaborate, because if you don't, you will not be open to the developers community. I think this is one of the problems that the automotive industry has faced so far, is content, for example. So if you think of companies like Netflix, right, or Spotify, and you reached out to them as an OEM and say, oh, I want to have your application in my car. And they will be, okay, so I need to adapt my software to run on your specific vehicle line, and your volume is what? The volume of
Yeah.
vehicle is really small for these companies. So we cannot expect, this companies that are providing content and good applications that we users like to say, oh, I'm going to put an effort and develop, my software to run on a Volkswagen car. No.
Mm.
They will create an application for the vehicle if you have a set standardized APIs, and then they can create a vehicle application that can run in cars. You can do customization on top of that, of course. I'm not saying that all cars will be running exactly the same thing, but you need to have a level of standardization in there to open for innovation. So I hope that OEMs understand that this is necessary. And again, I'm not saying everyone having the same thing in the car. You go into, different brands in the car looking exactly the same. There's a lot of customization that you can do on top. But the basic, so again, standardized applications, APIs, for example, you need to have that.
Yeah.
So I hope OEMs realize it.
It's interesting the bargaining power a group let's say like Volkswagen has, because they have so many different brands producing so many vehicles. Recently on the podcast, we had Jada Smith from Karma Automotive, and they're producing 5,000 cars a year. So, not so much bargaining power there with the tech companies, maybe. Soon on the podcast, we have a gentleman from Nikola Motors, who, again, they're producing even less than that every year. So, difficult for the car companies to collaborate with these tech companies. But you mentioned Amazon earlier, AWS. I mean, I'm seeing them everywhere at the moment. So you see the AWSs, the Googles, Microsoft, they're very much part of this automotive ecosystem now.
Definitely. I think moving forwards, digital twins and replicating the vehicle systems in the cloud, it's going to become standard. Even now at CES, we heard an announcement which for me was one of the announcements I was most excited about is Stellantis using AWS and BlackBerry to have their cockpit system on the cloud. And for the final customer, that may not mean much. People will be like, oh, what does that actually mean? But what that means is that the whole Stellantis can collaborate on the cloud in building their cockpit system and whatever they're building there in the cloud can be replicated in the car. So development, it's much easier than it used to be before, when you actually need the actual hardware to start your software development. So this is the areas where AWS plays a really big role, but not just them, of course, all cloud companies, but AWS seems to be the most committed at the moment. And I think, yes, they're going to have a very important role, especially on this area of, creating digital twins. And this is a technology that we're going to hear more and more in the future.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about digital twins. We speak a lot about digital twins here. Where do you see, you mentioned a cockpit there, but what other use cases do you see for digital twin, and what benefits would the customer get in the end case?
That's a great question. And I was talking to Smart
Yeah.
Europe, and they are using digital twins to improve the customer experience. So if you're able to replicate the vehicle system in the cloud, every time that you get in contact with the company, doesn't matter which touch point you are using, they will have a centralized area where they can see your car, all the applications that you have, the software layers that you have in your car, everything that was personalized. So how many times you had to go to the dealer, for example, what you've done. And they will have a customized way of, talking to you. You won't have to provide all your details. They will know exactly what is happening in your car, and they will know how to address it. So this is, helping for the customer, but providing a much seamless experience. But it's not just about the customer experience. I think everything, when you have everything concentrated, centralized in a single place, and the whole company and even suppliers can see what is happening in the car, you can develop a better software. You can see, oh, this user is having problems with the system. Let me see if all the users are having the same problem with the system. Oh, yes, they are. Okay, let's make a change. And because the system is running in the cloud, and you have a very good idea of the software, of the hardware running in the car, you can actually start the development, start testing your technology much quicker, and you can deploy an improvement for your vehicle feature much quicker than before, in a week, for example, or days. So I think digital twins are going to transform the whole vehicle life cycle, from the customer experience, design, even buying a car. Another thing that talking to Smart Europe, but other OEMs are looking as well, is you are able to see your vehicle. You have a very good visualization on a vehicle, on a phone application, for example, and you can make changes on the design of your car before you buy it. You don't actually need to go to the dealer. So having all this information centralized in the cloud is transformative. Is a paradigm shift. Sorry, it's the fourth time I'm saying this now.
It's exciting. Obviously, a digital twin is, let's say, for want of a definition, a digital replica of a physical object in the cloud or otherwise. And artificial intelligence plays a role within that. Do you see AI playing a role separate to digital twin, or they're always sort of linked together?
Oh, I think they would run together.
They
I
run
think we're
together.
going to see AI everywhere. And this is the key message we're saying at CES. AI is everywhere. Even we're talking about using ChatGPT in your vehicle assistance, but also, God, you can use AI for improving your ADAS functionalities. You can use AI in the cloud as well to see how your vehicles can be improved over time. So yes, AI will be pretty much there in all levels of the car in the
Okay.
future.
Final question. Speaking a lot about OEMs, also from the supplier perspective, any really cool, exciting things happening on that side at the moment?
I'm very excited about suppliers that are offering some levels of automation to the OEMs. So, we have suppliers that will enable OEMs to select which insights they want to collect from the car, for example. I think this is a really cool one. So when you think about connected cars, right, and what OEMs can do with the data that they collect from the vehicle, Do OEMs really need to transfer all the data generated in the car to the cloud? Not really. No, that's too expensive. There's so much data being generated in the car. And plus, what do you do with all of this? How do you analyze? How do you actually make sense of it? So one of the cool technologies, I think, is this automator. So you can see it's kind of an automation in the car. So you look at the vehicle and you see what you want to improve and which insights you want to collect, and then you program it, and you are going to collect data just about these insights. Only this data is going to be transferred for you in the cloud. So you don't actually have to also spend money with the storage as well of all of the data that's not going to be necessary. Created these enormous data lakes that give you absolutely no insights of anything. So I think this is a really cool area that's really helping OEMs to become smarter, really. And you can change the insights remotely. So you're collecting this kind of data, you don't need this anymore, you want to collect something different, and you can do this all automatically for your whole fleet. I think this is really, really interesting.
Yeah, really interesting. And it's amazing how in all this discussion, it's so much about software. The car industry is so much about software now. We're not talking about mechanics. Obviously, that exists, design exists, but software is where the playing field is at the moment. Final question.
Of course.
Smartphone on wheels, computer on wheels. What's your favorite, or do you have another one?
I don't like smartphones.
Computers on wheels?
Computer on wheels be better, but I think why don't I like those? The car is it's very different from a phone in the sense that you have functional safety in there. So if your system stops working in your phone, that's fine. You reset it. It's okay. Life goes on.
Yeah.
If that happens in your car, you're in trouble, right?
Yeah.
So you need to develop things that are specific to the vehicle, right? You need to have functional safety from the offset. And I think this is something that some OEMs are still struggling a little bit, especially when you are moving towards the software-defined vehicles. It is sometimes easy to not give the importance to safety that it should have, right? So we do see some OEMs overlooking safety, and I don't think that should be the case, right? And I think perhaps it's because of this idea that the car is a smartphone on wheels, and it's not. It is a completely different thing. This is we're talking about things that can cause risks to human life. So it's really a software-defined vehicle.
Software-defined vehicle. We'll leave it there. Software-defined vehicle. Maitê, thank you so much for joining. Appreciate it.